Christian climate and then the action part. And for too long, the 50,000 churches in the UK may have kind of done their intercessions and then walked off and not done anything else. So this is this really key component around action. But prayer is action, lamenting is action, washing feet is action, speaking to the media is action, living differently is action, self-sacrificing is action. So it's everything. So it brings all of you. So your names are different, your abilities are different, your passions are different. So run with who you are, but it's about action. Now the Christian part, we do have a really sweet spot to play, and I really want to, I can't express this enough. We are so trusted and so respected because we have such high trust, such transparency, such accountability and such love. So we want to be to XR, this regen area where we can really power back upstream some of that. It's massive. What they're doing is, Roger Hallam's quote from prison, I looked and thought, that sounds like a man I know, or Jesus. Kind of does, Get on with the task in hand. Do not worry about me. It's not about me. So there's that beautiful upstream stuff, and then it's taking the truth of XR to our congregations and our homes and our communities, which is tell the truth, act now. Okay, so we've got this amazing intersection. Any questions at all? Anything else anyone wants to say on that? Because this is about you. I just kicked it off a little bit.
Yeah, just a reflection I've had, a question that comes up a lot for me is like that verse in Romans about sort of respecting authorities and the law, but Martin Luther King said respect for the law is like willingly accepting the consequences. So like he went to jail, so he didn't run away, and that's what we're doing in XR. We're willingly being arrested, so that's how we respect the law.
Yeah, thank you. That's brilliant, Jeremy. That actually we take what we're saying is we put ourselves underneath the consequences of our actions, which may be arrest.
Look at the issues of hope and despair in where we are, because a lot of the science is telling us that we may be too late. We've got this small window, we may not act, but if we don't act and there's not much kind of appetite for it at the moment, we may miss it.
Our spiritual focus on poverty, learning to live with what is enough. Because I think the challenge we're facing isn't necessarily technical. It isn't about coming up with engineering solutions to climate change. It's actually spiritual, and learning to live with what is enough. I think we have a lot to say about that in the Christian tradition.
First of all, let's take a moment, this moment, to consider why we're here. Let's remember our love for this beautiful planet that feeds, nourishes and sustains us. Let's recall our love for the whole of humanity in all corners of the world. Let's recollect our sincere desire to protect all of this for ourselves, for all living beings, and for generations to come. As we act today, may we find the courage to bring a sense of peace, love, and appreciation to everyone we encounter, to every word we speak, and to every action we make. We are here for all of us. By means of introduction, my name is Luke Jackson. I've been part of XR since the April Rebellion. The intention of this session really is to cover non-violent direct action, the benefits of it, why we're doing it, and I suppose our personal accountability in taking these actions. I want to thank you for inviting me to do this, and I will do my best. I am by no means a legal expert. I am by no means an expert in non-violent direct action. However, I've spent the best part of the last 6 months learning, talking about it, and helping to, I suppose, galvanise people in and around Richmond and elsewhere to take part in this activity. What I'd like to do first is I've never met, apart from Peter came along to one of our training last week in Richmond. I've never met anyone around this hall. So I think what I'd like to do first is to ask everybody to introduce themselves. Okay, so if I run through the agenda, I'm going to... Ordinarily, this MVDA training is for I guess quite a wider spectrum of people, and we go through a climate recap. Now, I'll just take a show of hands. Do we want to do that?
I think we know that, don't we? No.
We all know why we're here. I think we've just said that. So we're going to
we're going to skip the recap. We are going to engage in the knot game, which just gets the blood flowing and gets us working as a team for about 5 minutes. Then we will talk through the concept of non-violent direct action and undertake an exercise called spectrum lines, which is understanding really what we see individually as being non-violence in the action that we take, and understanding, I suppose, other people's perception of what non-violence actually means. And that can be quite different. We'll then go on to around 20 minutes of the legalities of what we're doing, whether you are intent on arrest, intent on providing arrestee support. So clearly, I am not a lawyer. I am in no way a legal expert. So I will impart, if you like, the information that's been provided through XR, and there will be follow-up information at the end of this training as well. I think the one we'll come on to that as we move on. We're not going to. We'll talk about affinity groups for about 5 minutes, and the reason that I'm going to do that rather than skip it all together is that there's been some quite good learning, certainly in the last few days, in terms of affinity groups and how they will play a part in the forthcoming rebellion. So I think it is worth spending 5 minutes on that, certainly not the 25 that's been standard. Equally, from talking to Mel before doing this, I think you have your own regenerative culture anyway, so we're not going to, unless you want to cover it at all, talk briefly about regenerative culture. And then passive resistance, we're going to spend quite a bit of time undertaking some group exercises on the kind of situations that we will face in just over a week's time, and undertaking, if you like, some training and some activity to help us for when those situations arise, which should be fun. And then finally, the action consensus going into the October Rebellion, and then finally check out how we're all feeling at the end of it. The next thing is the group agreement. So again, this is very much designed for I guess a wider spectrum of people. So I would say 3 groups. We've got about 30 people here, or we should have. So 2, 4, 6, 8. And then to get a little bit closer, what we want to do is we want to point your hands into the middle, across them. Right. You've done this. You can close your eyes or not, but basically you all need to find a corresponding hand.
Corresponding?
Well, a hand.
Okay.
Just get a hand, that's it. We should end up with
Sorry,
everybody.
I'm going to mess it up.
Yeah.
Let's go that way. Is it that way?
Yeah, cross your hands.
Yeah.
Should be one. You should be holding one hand, not 2.
Oh, one.
One.
Two.
So one in each hand. One in each hand. But someone here's got a hand on, so you two probably need to split. That's it. Only holding one. Another person.
There we go.
Right,
Is it
now
okay
then.
to hold the person next
So
to
we
you?
need to speak to each other. What we need to do now is to untie, without letting go of the hand, untie the knot and end up in a circle.
Can we talk?
Oh yeah, and you can talk. Yeah, please go.
Untie the knot. Somebody might hurt each other.
I can stick you lot under there. Whoa! That ain't gonna happen. You're right.
Should I go under?
Yeah. Should we follow?
Thread the needle.
We got it?
Oh, it's not beautiful.
Right, do we need to do that as well?
We perhaps
I think.
if you go underneath.
No, that's fine. No. Well done. We're now going to conduct that exercise again, but this time we're going to do it without talking. So, back into the groups, cross the hands. Right, go.
No talking.
I think we may have to.
You're going to dislocate something?
Okay. Are we good to call that one a day? Good effort, no. Yes. All right. Thanks, everybody. Please, no offensive language, even in the form of jokes. Why am I talking? Again, probably most unlikely in this group, but in order to keep the agenda on track, it's important, maybe before asking a question, just to ask yourself, why am I asking this question? Is this to further my own ego? I'm my own biggest critic. Don't interrupt others while they're speaking, hence the use of hand signals, because that helps us not to do that, and use the group communication signals to stop us doing that. We can do those things, but actually, without legislative and regulatory action by government, none of that is enough. None of it is enough. And that is why we have to have non-violent direct action through Extinction Rebellion, because we have to force governmental change in order to have any chance at all of addressing this existential threat. We have a shared vision of change. We are trying to create a world that is fit for generations to come. We openly challenge ourselves to challenge this toxic system. I see that as really, really important. We welcome everyone and we welcome every part of everyone. We are a non-violent network, and I have to say, for all the challenges, that's one thing that I hold close to my own heart, and it really keeps me in this network. We are not violent. We avoid blaming and shaming, and again, we have to constantly remind ourselves, because it is, it is quite easy to be subject to. What are we demanding through the activity that we are undertaking and that we're about to undertake in October? So first of all, the government must tell the truth about the climate and the ecological emergency, and reverse these inconsistent policies and work alongside the media to communicate that with citizens. Mel.
Can I just add in there that one of the truth things that we, as people of faith, might want to look at is also churches telling the truth.
Governments must enact legally binding policy measures to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2025, and reduce overall consumption levels. And I heard someone talking earlier about the fact that we have to become comfortable with a new world, a new life where we become
used to living on less. I forgot what I heard talking earlier, but I think it was you, Mike, actually. That's exactly what we were demanding, and national citizens' assemblies to help all of these things happen through that society, to make that societal change.
So, non-violent direct action. So, in terms of, we are going to come on to learning from each other in terms of what we believe non-violent direct action constitutes. But first of all, I will read the definition from Extinction Rebellion that is in line with the movement's values and principles. Therefore, non-violent direct action is tactics and strategies for social change outside of institutional channels, using methods of protest, intervention, non-cooperation and creative solution without use of injurious force to achieve systemic change. So that is the Extinction Rebellion definition. But by using non-violence, it exposes the violence of the existing system. And I suppose one of the points that we have to accept is that we have, in entering into this action, we have no guarantees that those that we stand in front of or oppose will not use violence against us, be that, if you like, the police system or individuals in doing this. But one thing that we do by deploying this tactic is to expose the violence of others as individuals and as a system. The other reasons and benefits of undertaking this course of action are to agitate and disrupt business as usual, and clearly we need to put our movement absolutely front of house. So alongside the non-violent direct action, we also have this theatre that is going on alongside the action to gain public participation.
And I think that people can perceive you as violent because you're attacking a system that they're wholly bought into. And so they find what you're doing very threatening.
In ethical terms, it's absolutely essential and non-negotiable, but also being aware of the little triggers that can, the stumbling blocks. I was on the climate strike last week, and a woman was carrying a banner. A bloke who was anti the strike punched the banner, and a bloke on the strike, then, his immediate impulse was to hit the bloke, so we all had to do you see what I mean? Even though
One of the other reasons and benefits of non-violent direct action is what we call dilemma actions. I wonder if someone could share what you think a dilemma action might be.
If they allow you to protest, they show their supporters that they've lost control. If they don't allow you to protest, they expose themselves as systemically unjust.
Another good example was the recent climate strike and the extent to which the state and the police are challenged with. To what extent do you police what is essentially a school youth climate strike? And they were faced with an absolute dilemma in terms of do they allow the movement to literally go wherever they want, and there's a strong argument for doing that because these are school children, or do you put on the street sufficient force that then actually presents if you like, a counter view whereby people are saying these are school children and the state are deploying so many police, this is unjust. We have we have actions that are largely non-arrestable and symbolic. So things like, we talked about the Red Brigade, and performance, street performance, message spreading, creative things like street painting. So unlikely that anybody's going to get arrested for those things. Then you have lower risk actions, such as, and we'll come on to affinity groups, but actions such as a short, brief roadblock, whereby you are most unlikely to be arrested for doing that. Spray chalk then can be washed away. And then of course, come on to talking about the higher risk actions, whereby it's a long roadblock. You could potentially end up breaking a window, or you are going to sit down on a bridge until such point that someone will have to choose to arrest you in order to clear that bridge. So there are, I will come to your question later. So we are talking about tiers of action. It's important, and we talk about this in this training generally, because of course there are many people who come into the movement who do not want to get arrested, maybe want to be involved in that kind of second tier of action, but still not be arrested. And it's important to know that there are tiers. What I'm going to do is ask, if I could ask everyone to line up against this back wall. If this corner of the room is non-violent, and the corner by the right is violent, extremely violent. I'm going to give you some examples of activities, and I want you to stand on that spectrum where you believe that activity is in terms of its level of violence, so non-violent to violent. So the first one, this is your own perception, by the way. So the first one is kicking down a door and storming the stage at a conference. And then if we take someone from the right to the centre of the room, in terms of, you see it as being pretty violent, maybe. Bob?
Yes, well, you've got potential to, firstly you're doing damage, you're actually stopping something happening that could be, okay, but you are potentially going to injure some people if you're actually storming the stage. You will actually also be provoking a reaction, because people's immediate reaction when someone starts doing something like that can be to hit back.
It could be very frightening. To kick down a door requires a high degree of force, and could be all kinds of reasons, like down to mental illness or past experiences or whatever, why people might be extremely frightening themselves.
Over there, and this over here would be more effective. Let's see if anybody staying in the position about whether you think it's violent or not thinks that it's effective. Does anybody?
I'm just thinking of the example in Houses of Parliament when the rebels came in, I think it was March, and it was a kind of semi-naked protest, and they didn't knock down a door, but it was effective and getting loads and loads of media coverage. It went viral, so
was it effective at getting any sort of discussion about either climate or change on climate? Because I would argue, that's like what's effective even.
I think for me what's important is that it's not just individuals what they represent, so if it's just one person. The risk is that it sort of stereotypes the whole movement as sort of a wacko weirdo. Oh, that's what they would be doing. Oh, they're not serious. I think the power is in saying this is mainstream society, this is you and me.
Purely think about whether this is violent or non-violent in terms of your own perception, only your own perception, and that is the cracking the window of Tory HQ.
Sorry.
Cracking the window of Tory headquarters, violent or non-violent. One small change before we go into the the effectiveness dimension, so which kind of gets us there, but what do you believe the public perception of that action would be in terms of violent, non-violent?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful in talking about degrees of violence and levels of violence. If it's a non-violent movement, that means none. That means none. And of course, after that, there are loads of degrees of violence of none to me personally.
Somebody said that.
Okay, right. So, effectiveness based on that activity. So, cracking Tory HQ window. That's what I said, isn't it? Yeah. Cracking the window of Tory HQ in terms of effectiveness. That's non-effective.
This is effective.
In terms of effectiveness, it doesn't target the system enough, it targets, and there's too much blame and shame. So to me, the problem is not the Conservative Party, the problem is the worship of money and a system that disconnects us from our global neighbours. The problem is a lot bigger than the Tory Party, so I don't see a point personally in targeting them. I see a point in targeting the city or Parliament as a whole, or the system in which we live, which causes us to live destructive lives.
Smashing military planes that are about to be sold to an oppressive regime that is killing citizens. Smashing military planes that are about to be sold. Does someone want to make a point from the non-violent? This is the. Oh wow! I'm sorry. I'm so convinced that this is the non-violent action that it would be wrong to not ask for his opinion. There you go.
How far are we willing to go to save human and non-human life by destroying inanimate objects? And if we're not willing to save people's lives by destroying any inanimate object, then I question that.
The question wasn't about how far we're willing to go. The question was how violent we believe the action to be.
Okay, yeah. I suppose, if you take out the so presumably the point we're making is that's about justification for the action.
Yeah, rather than the action itself, yeah.
That's the point. If we add the effectiveness dynamic, whereby this is effective and the wall is ineffective. What's the Thanks everybody. We'll come back to the circle again. The objective of that exercise is for us to be able to actually visibly witness that and see it within our own group, to see and feel what the difference is between just this group of people who have got so much in common, and to understand that exists and that needs to be understood and discussed before we just go ahead and undertake action. So this section really is about the legal advice provided by Extinction Rebellion for anyone considering an arrest in terms of witnessing arrests. What I will do is I'm going to run through the important, I suppose, 5 points to remember in terms of anyone considering arrest or anyone witnessing, anyone who is passing on advice to someone who is considering being arrested. However, there is a significant amount of information that we will send on after this session, and equally, and this certainly goes for me, and it's getting closer and closer, and I still haven't done it yet. I've undertaken the Know Your Rights training on Zoom, Extinction Rebellion, and half of it seems to have gone out the window already, although I've made copious notes. But I am crystal clear in terms of my own responsibility for understanding what I will face and what risks I will face in terms of making that decision as to whether to be arrested and arrestable. One point that was made, I'll just share this now, the point that was made in Hackney earlier this week is that in considering arrest, whether you are arrestable, there is absolutely nothing wrong and no obligation on anybody to decide that they are going to make that decision once they get to the rebellion itself. The 5 points that we are being that the movement suggests that we remember in taking this action, first of all, is that we make no comment. We make no comment whilst the activity is underway. There are police liaison officers who will be in operation at the various sites. Part of their brief is to get to know as much information as possible, and therefore we should be very, very careful in not sharing, and the safest way to not get sucked into what at the outset would seem a relatively harmless conversation is to make no comment at all. And once you actually then get into the, if you like, the legal process, is to give a no comment interview at the station and pass no comment whilst you're undertaking the action. So the next point is not to give any personal details whilst you're in the action itself and whilst you're on the street. That if you give those personal details, they could be acted upon there and then. Once you get to the station itself, then it's in your best interest to actually give, and you need to give your personal details once you're actually in the police station. The third piece of advice is not to accept the offer of the duty solicitor that is in the station. They will not have the necessary legal expertise in terms of the protest movement, protest law, and therefore there is information which we're providing after this training session. There are bus cards which you ideally should take into the arrest with you. Sorry, I'll give.
They're called bust cards. Bust. Yes. If you're busted, have the card because it contains some legal information, including the number of a more appropriate solicitor than a duty solicitor, and space to write. I think it's got space to write contact.
Yeah. One of the points that's made on the Extinction Rebellion, if you like, Know Your Rights training sessions, and I think there's a few to come over the next week as well. Is one of the things they also advise, just in case you lose one of these, is to go into that situation maybe with numbers written on your arm as well, so that you're absolutely in a situation where you know you're going to be able to get hold of the solicitor, group of solicitors that you know that you can rely upon.
Is it right that a police officer has to give you 2 warnings before they arrest you?
I can deal with that quickly now, although I was going to deal with it later. The police were giving 3 warnings in April generally, and that will give you a lot of time to move. They're not obliged to do so, they're obliged to warn you. So they have to give you sufficient time to move, and we've seen a couple of acquittals on the basis that they simply didn't give enough time. They said there's a section 14, we want you to move, and then arrested someone straight off, pretty much. But they could just give you 1 warning, stand back for a couple of minutes, and then come and arrest you if you don't move. So be aware that 3 warnings is something they were doing, and I'm not sure they will do this time.
The next thing is not to accept a caution. There will be obviously a clear temptation to accept a caution, get the whole thing over quickly. That will stay on your record. And equally, it is an admission of guilt in doing so. Part of the objective of being arrestable also is that we, to a degree, clog up the legal process. We, if you like, cause more problems for the system by doing so, and therefore it's an admission of guilt, and there may be some kind of miscarriage of justice, or the police may miss something procedural over the course of the arrest, and therefore you may not be charged as a result of that, whereas a caution is an admission of guilt. So there's 2 things there. One is an admission of guilt, and the second one is that from a movement's perspective, then we are losing an opportunity for us to put some pressure on the system in terms of that going to the point of court and charge. The last one of the 5 is to ask the police under what power they are arresting you. And again, it's important that they're really clear that the police will be sort of flashing light on their uniform. They will be filming the action of arrest, and therefore you put them under pressure in terms of them having to state clearly under what power they are arresting you. And again, that opens up the opportunity of some lack of procedure when it comes to the point of potential point of court.
The process of arrest was previously always witnessed by a legal observer. There were plenty of legal observers, partly because we had a relationship with an organisation that provided legal observers, and that was true throughout the April Rebellion. That is no longer the case, and with an increase in likely numbers of arrestables, Extinction Rebellion have come to the conclusion that it is likely there won't be enough legal observers to witness arrests. So although they're training lots of legal observers, the chances are that we may not have it when we take actions, particularly as we have probably less legal observers within CCA than some of the local regional groups. The answer to this has been to ask everybody to be able to witness an arrest. And what that involves is being ready when you see someone being arrested by the police to take whatever details you can. Now, some people will be willing to give you their name then and there, and that can be quite important because you can then feed back to other people the name of the person being arrested. But at very least, it's really helpful to take a physical description of the person and where they're being arrested, so that you can come back to find people connected with them. The other things that you need to find out are where they're being taken. So if you witness an arrest, the police officer making the arrest is extremely unlikely to be able to tell you that at the time the arrest is being made, apart from the fact that they'll get really angsty if you keep asking that. However, if you were to follow on behind an arrest or walk nearby, and then when the person is going into the van, what we found is that the police are usually quite helpful at that point. And they will tell you where the van is going. If that changes, and it might do in the October Rebellion, they might be much less cooperative, then take the identification of the van, because from that we can track where it's gone.
You mean the number plate?
The number plate, but all the vans have on them also further identification. So they all have a sort of number, combination of letters and numbers on them. And if you can get that, then what you will do, and we haven't yet established a structure for that, but we will do, and we will disseminate it, is you will feed back, sorry, yes?
Just, can you take photos? Do police mind you taking, because the quickest bit to get physical images of people is photographs.
People were photographing arrests in April. I can't see any real reason that you couldn't, but I know that the police sometimes get very angsty about that, and you might find that they're threatening to take your... The reason that identification of the person being arrested is really important is that we need to provide support. If someone's arrested, the last thing they need to cope with is being on their own when they're released, which might be in the middle of the night, might be in an unknown area in London, and in April they were taking people as far as Brighton. We will put together, and this is something I'll talk to you about, volunteering. We're going to put together, as best we can, a rotary of people who will go to police stations to meet people who've been arrested, and to provide them with some kind of assistance and someone to greet them, that sort of thing. And we can't do that if we don't know it. And it's important that their group that they're with, or their friends, or people who know them also know, so that other people can be contacted. Now, if you yourself are arrested, the chances are that we're going to go through the passive arrest process in a minute. You will be taken to a police van where you will have to wait for a considerable amount of time, in all likelihood, because they fill up the vans and then they wait for ages until they find instructions for the police station that's available to receive people, and then you're driven in a large group of people to the police station. You will be processed by a custody sergeant. At that point, if you haven't given your name and details, XR recommend that you give them at that point, because that will shorten the time that you're in custody. You'll be shown to a cell. They're not very comfortable, they're small, but take a book, okay? If you think that you're going to be doing a road blog.
Are you allowed to take, like, I have this rucksack, would I be allowed to take that in the cell with me? Would I be allowed to take my phone with me?
No. They take your stuff, but they do allow you to take a book.
Okay.
So, if you're going to be sitting on a road blog where there is a possibility that you might be arrested, you want to take some reading material, otherwise you're going to be spending a lot of hours doing nothing. You also have access to a couple of phone calls. One will be to a solicitor, which is where the number of the solicitor is important. One will be to someone else. So that could be a family member, it could be someone in CCA with whom you found links. But it's always important to tell someone where you are. Experience has shown us that processing usually takes a minimum of 4 hours, mostly a minimum of 6. It can be much longer if there are a lot of people. Eventually, the police will interview you. You can give a full interview. The recommendation is that you make a no-comment interview. You can prepare a statement and read a statement. We would advise that you avail yourself of a solicitor at the police station, not the duty solicitor, but one of the solicitors you run, even if you have to wait. That bit of legal advice is free. Thereafter, the provision of legal services is determined by, the form you fill out. Most people don't qualify. Lots of local groups, if you're tied into your local group, will assist you with legal expenses. They crowdfund to help people for that. And I think you would need to talk to CCA about that. There have been some crowdfunding exercises for that. So that's something to bear in mind, but that would be post-arrest. When we had people arrested in April, they were often released under investigation. So they weren't bailed or nothing happened. They were just released and the police continued investigations. Almost all those people have been charged subsequently. We expect this time that it's more likely that people will be bailed, because one of the things they did in July when we had uprisings in various places was to impose bail conditions that meant you couldn't return to the protest. And so that's something you need to bear in mind, that when you're bailed, your conditions may be that you don't return to the protest. If you do return to the protest, and it would be your right to do so, you would be in breach of bail conditions. If you were arrested again, you may be held in custody. Okay, so that's just something I want to be aware of. All these sorts of issues will be further explored in the written stuff. People who were arrested in April are only just coming to trial now, and those trials will go on all the way into December, despite them setting aside special courts. It's grown so much that people have been asking about affinity groups. So we've set up a WhatsApp for people who might want to join an affinity group, and Heidi Rustenberger is going to organise that. And so if you want to be in a specific affinity group, you could Well, you can come and speak to me. I need your phone number and we will add you to that chat. So an affinity group is your support system in effect. It's like a buddy system in larger groups. But it is also the basis of actions in Extinction Rebellion. And so when groups are road blocking, for instance, who take in that sort of action, they are usually doing it in affinity groups. And you will have a variety of people in an affinity group, some of whom are non-arrestable because they'll be holding the contact details for everybody, they'll be the base. Often some of the arrestee support comes through affinity groups. That's the idea of it. Hasn't worked quite so well in practice. That's why the small ones are not working so well. But the idea is that you get to know people and you trust them. And they're called affinity groups because you should have an affinity with the people, that you should have some kind of connection with them, either a sort of, you're all thinking from the same space, it could be a political space, it could be the amount of risk that you feel that you can take. And this is partly why CCA kind of operates like an affinity group, because we all come from a similar think space and we're all motivated by faith issues and that sort of thing. So we have a lot of bonds anyway. So we are able to support each other. But as we grow, we don't all know each other and that becomes a bit more difficult.
There's another good example there now, which is something that's going to be in a couple of days. So the affinity might be a specific kind of action that you've decided to undertake. So one of the things that we're talking about for like-minded individuals with enrichment at the moment is the possibility of an affinity group where we all go to the action basically wearing suits and smart business dress and merge into the surrounding public and then literally all, if you like, join the action as if we're coming out of the day-to-day business that's going on around us, and therefore that affinity is an affinity in terms of the type of action that we're being drawn from.
And what that means, of course, is that affinity groups can form around a certain action and then they can melt away. But what we were talking about was a slightly longer standing relationship of trust. That means that when you go in to do what might be a really uncomfortable action, where you're at risk of arrest and things, you trust the people around you. And you trust them to look out for you and to be able to hold your stress levels and to be able to just be with you in that and talk to you all kind of. Because being alone in those situations is really hard. So we can, actually now is probably a good time to say, when we get onto the bridge, we are aiming to have an information point and welcome hub for CCA. There are two aspects of regenerative culture. The first is to make sure that when you're in an action or on site or whatever, you're looking after yourself. So it involves touching base about how you're feeling physically, making sure you're not getting overtired, making sure that you've got the right clothing, all that kind of thing, because if you don't, you're not really helping anybody. You then get to the stage where other people are looking after you. Almost as importantly, we've recognised that people burn out really quickly when they're doing those sort of high-octane stuff, where there's a lot of emotion, where there's a lot of anxiety about what you're doing. You burn out much more quickly. So it's really important to do things like ground yourself, be really aware of your physical symptoms and how you're feeling. Be aware of your breathing, be aware of how you just are. And that is part of the regenerative process. And then, as you feel that you're reaching a limit, go and take a break. We will have spaces, both sacred spaces in our site. We were looking for churches where we can go.
So, part of non-violent direct action is passive resistance. Passive resistance helps both from a legal perspective, and so far as if you are passively resisting any kind of arrest, then that will have less legal implications than if you are actually resisting arrest. And then equally from a public our perspective, the fact that we're being passive and peaceful has, as we showed on the spectral lines, a different message in terms of the actual public. I think in terms of time, I'm going to do this as a demonstration exercise, so we're just going to have one group of people. So passive resistance has benefits both in terms of the legally and the impact that it has in terms of PR, but also it has operational and process impact. And so when we talk about being uncomfortable with things, this is one of the things that I feel uncomfortable in describing. However, it is, and again to Mel's point of being grounded, reminding yourself when you do this, why you're doing it, is really important, because if it is something that you're not so comfortable with, then you need to be there, you need to be present with it, and understand why you're doing it before you do it. So if part of the roadblock and part of the arrest process is to enable us to stay in a particular site for a period of time, then the longer that arrest takes, then it's going to help how long we stay in that particular site. Therefore, there is, if you like, an operational part to it which will help. So what I would like to do is to ask someone here who wants to volunteer to be the person who's going to be arrested. Okay. So, if I could ask you to, if it's okay with you, to sit on the floor and you are blocking the highway. So I need 4 volunteer and police officers, please.
Don't sue me if you put your back out.
Right. And so allow yourself to be walked over to the police van, and of course that would speed things up quite helpfully for the police. We want this thing to take as long as possible. So what we want to do first of all is to demonstrate what happens, or what could be quite useful for the police, by becoming not so passive, but becoming absolutely rigid. So if you can kind of lift your knees and be as rigid as you possibly can. What I'd like one of you will be the senior police officer, so I'd like you to basically ask Ruth if she's going to be going to move from the site, otherwise you're going to have to arrest her, give the necessary warnings, and then if she still resists arrest, then what I would like you to do is carry to the end of the hall here. So, who's going to be this senior officer?
Me?
Yeah?
And what am I doing again?
Yeah. Advise her that if she doesn't move, then you're going to she risks arrest under section 14.
Okay, all right.
Is she willing to move? Would she stand up and move? If she doesn't, then advise her that she will be arrested, and ask the officers to take her away.
I need to ask you to move out of the road, please. Are you willing to move for us? I need to advise you that if you're not willing to move, we're going to arrest you under section 14. But said with authority. It wasn't a question. Are you prepared to move for us? Okay, officers, can you help me move this lady from the road?
I love it.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult was that? That was, yeah? Yeah, so what? Difficulty what? 2 out of 10 is not easy? Yeah, right down the bottom. So, this time, we're going to go as floppy as possible when the arrest takes place. Okay? So we can go through the charade of the arrest process if you like, but I think the absolute demonstration here is about the effort required for the police. So you're going to arrest this person and take them to the same point. There you go. You don't need to. Yeah. Every muscle is relaxed. It's heavy as.
fact that that police van potentially would be considerably further away. What in comparison? Yeah? To what magnitude? If the other was 2, what would you... Right. But even if... Yeah, I mean, even if you go, if you're going 2 to 4, that's 100% difference, I think, if my maths are right. It's twice the difficult. Chances are you've got a much longer journey as well, so you're making... If you are undertaking that decision to be arrested, then, and certainly if it is a point of trying to hold a particular place, then it's going to be much more effective if you take that very, very passive and heavy as possible body position. Thank you, please. We do respect what you do. So, moving away from the police and onto the impact of the general public. Clearly, there is a different challenge insofar as we are obstructing people, we are potentially going to make them angry. And this exercise really provides an opportunity for us to, as closely as possible, practice being in that situation. And the advice, if there is any, really is that I think as we did before we went into the actual kind of final arrest of the position, as we stand our ground and we're on a roadblock, then the first thing that we should do is again ground ourselves, remind ourselves why we're there, be calm, be present, and when faced with anger, is to retain that calmness, which is now going to be tested by the way. So I guess a couple of things to mention in terms of, if you like, strategies, tactics in terms of retaining that calm and trying to calm the other person. One thing is to try and mirror the other person in terms of the way, their body actions, certainly not mimic them and insult them, but try and mirror the way that they're talking to you in responding to them. The second thing that you can try, and one tactic that you can deploy, is that invariably people will be quite aggressive and maybe quite loud. And I've been waiting all year to take my son to this football match and you're stopping it happening. There's a tactic called catch and drop, whereby you start off mirroring the loudness and speed with which people are talking to you. So I actually understand what you're saying to me, sir, but let me explain to you exactly why we're here. We're all the same people. We're going to understand their situation as much as we possibly can, but of course we will be standing our ground, and we need to continue to be calm. So this exercise we call angry drivers. What I'm going to ask you to do is to split into twos. So starting here, can you all become twos basically? So you're going to be faced with some pretty angry people. The task is to try and retain your own calm and calm them down. And you may have an opportunity to be able to say, can I explain to you why I'm stood here? This is not really where I want to be, but let me explain to you why I'm doing it. So, one of the good things about this exercise is that it prepares you. This is the roadblock. Please go to the corresponding person.
What are you doing here, right? You're making me late to work. I've got an important meeting, right? Why do you think you've got the right to do this to me? Come on, climate change isn't even... I want to get through! China! I want to get through, right? I'm a surgeon. I've got to do some open... No, listen to me. I've got to do some open... I've got a busy job. I'm working. I'm not all you please.
Why are you doing this?
mother, she's in the hospital. What do you think you're doing? Why are you here? Why are you here? Get out of my way. I've been trying to get there. She's ill, and you're blocking my way. All I want to do is go and see my mother. What is going on? Do you guys not think about what could happen? I just want to see my mother. That's all. Can you please just let us past?
What do you do?
You've just asked me a question. Are you happy for me to tell you what we're trying to do?
Fine, tell me.
Can I?
Tell me.
Okay.
Right, tell me.
So,
Oh! To stop me getting to work, that's why you're here.
The action is
To stop me
involving
getting to work. I'm
there
going
is
to
something more at stake here. If I could perhaps just explain what we're up to and why we're here. And I appreciate it's very, very frustrating for you. And I would be frustrated as well if I was
frustrated. When am I going to get to work? How am I going to get through here? When are you going to move for me?
Well, I guess I have to explain. We're holding this because we think there's something more important at stake. I don't wish to be here. I don't wish to be blocking the road.
Do you know how important it is for me to get to work? I've told you. I've got all sorts of pressures on me. And I've got a family to support. I've got 3 children to support.
Sure.
How am I going to get?
I hear you.
So can we have 2 examples from the angry drivers in terms of how they believe that the other person managed their anger and how they felt towards the end of it? So Mike, you've got...
He validated my emotion, so he allowed me to vent, and he named it, which made me feel heard, and then that brought it down.
Did you have difficulty maintaining your anger, by the way?
I did.
When you did that? Okay. Okay. One more. Paul?
Well, I was hitting, it was the frustration in a sense of hitting a block which was partly giving way to me.
She's having an asthma attack. If you don't go past the next 5...
What have you achieved? You want to tell me about it? What have you achieved if I lose my job? Do you want me to be sympathetic to your cause? Do you want me to care about your cause when I lose my job? I don't give a shit. I need to get to work. What are you going to do about it?
You're worried about losing your job because you can't get through.
Yeah.
People don't realise that the system that we have is destroying our lives.
not all scientists agree with you, do they?
99% of scientists now agree that we have 10 years to turn this around, and our politicians are no longer listening to us. We are at a critical point, and that is why we're here. We've tried for 30 years. We've tried. We have done letters. We have done petitions.
Areas of feedback, some good people to feedback, drivers. Tim?
Yeah, I gave him quite a hard time, and I swore to start with, see what he'd do. But Hannah, you actually brought up the issue quite quick, but I did find myself sticking on it, and which sort of seemed to be counterintuitive to what you said earlier. But Jonathan went to, about the world. He took it out to the world.
Okay. I tried to depersonalise it.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this to me? I said, I'm not doing it to you. I'm doing it because I'm part of something bigger.
I missed that in the flow of my rage, you see. That was all subliminal for me, but it worked. Because I was thinking, suddenly I'm almost smiling, and I thought I'm not as angry as I was, and I was trying bloody hard to be angry.